All right, Bruchim Aboyim, welcome everyone. I want to talk a little bit about this phenomenon that the people on the left are accusing people on the right of what they're calling Christian nationalism, and how ridiculous a lot of these claims are. I remember I was talking to someone on Twitter, and I quoted Glenn Beck, and they said, "Oh, Glenn Beck, he's a Christian nationalist." I was like, he's a Mormon. And not only is he a Mormon, but he said he would never live in Utah because he doesn't want his church to be that powerful of an influence in the government as it is in Utah. And that's why he lives in Idaho, where it has some influence, but not as much. So, someone who I know, and I really cherish his acquaintance, Senator Doug Mastriano. Now, he called himself a Christian nationalist, but the way he understands it is that his nationalism is tempered by his Christianity. That untempered nationalism is dangerous, but not in the sense that he wants to have the government force Christianity on everyone. And there's this specter that somehow the boogeymen that the left imagine to be on the right want to make an established church in America. And that's just nonsense. And especially they put this on President Trump. I mean, President Trump, he is a Christian, but he's not a super religious Christian, and he's certainly not the type who would want to eliminate the Establishment Clause. On the other hand, nor the Free Exercise Clause. And the truth of the matter is, both the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause are essentially one. There really isn't any difference between the two. One depends on the other. But the essential idea of the Establishment Clause is that we have no federal established church, like the Church of England, like the Chief Rabbinate of Israel, like the various churches of various countries in Europe, and Muslim-majority countries in the Middle East, some of which do call themselves, for example, Iran calls itself an Islamic Republic, etc., etc. This is the very thing that America is not supposed to have, at least on the federal level. And since 1948, it's been fairly recognized on the state and local level as well that the Establishment Clause, the courts have found, should apply. And that's been the opinion of the courts since 1947, 1948, thereabout. But nonetheless, they understand that certain activities, religious activities within the government sphere, are not violations of said clause. But in any event, I want to get back to a little bit more about the ideas that we're discussing here. Because this morning I was listening to Hugh Hewitt, a rather moderate Republican. He would call himself center-right. And they were discussing, I don't remember who he was interviewing, but they were discussing Kamala Harris speaking in the churches recently, Barack Obama going into churches encouraging people to vote for the Democrats. And why isn't that maligned with the same idea of Christian nationalism as we as they malign the right with? And in a certain sense, there's much more danger of a sort of religious nationalism from the left than from the right. Because it's the left who would like to remove the free exercise clause or limit it, and they'd like to limit many other aspects of the First Amendment. I often hear people on the left bemoaning the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, even though it was President Clinton who signed it into law with bipartisan support. They often speak out against RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restorations Act. The left really hate religious freedom. And there really isn't, it's not to say there aren't certain people who would like to see established religion in America, who tend to be on the right. But the majority of the ideas of what's on the right in America, as opposed to Europe, is that we want freedom and small government. And the idea of the First Amendment creating what Jefferson called a wall of separation between church and state is more about protecting the church from the state than the state from the church. And essentially, that is what is being attacked. The left would like to attack the church. They would like the church to be molded in their image and insisting that their way is the only way, which is not something you see as much on the right. On the right, there is much, the American right, there is much more classical liberalism of you do your thing and I do my thing. Meaning, when you go down south, you see there's a tremendous amount of respect for all different religions and denominations, and a sense of brotherhood of people of all different faiths, whether they're Christians, whether they're Jewish, whether they're Muslim, whether they're Buddhist, whatever there are, there's this certain sense of brotherhood of people of faith, no matter what denomination or religion you follow. Whereas in the north and in the big cities, there's this sense of hatred for people who are on the religious right. My own community winds up just by default where they've been living to be in those areas, and they've been finding a lot of opposition, particularly in the heavily Democrat areas, and quite often a lot of attacks. Recently in Williamsburg, there was an attempt to run people over with a car, screaming. Baruch Hashem, no one got hurt. But I, as a very rather visible Jew with a beard and payas, I get much more nervous walking around in Manhattan than I do, let's say if I would visit, I was in Arkansas a couple of years ago, and visiting there, and really I felt much more comfortable and safer there than I often do. I mean, I live in a rural area. In my own area, I feel comfortable, but to go into New York City, I'm quite scared, to be honest. Especially when I was driving a car with Trump stickers, I was afraid they could slash my tires or break my windows, or who knows what, because of the level of hatred that there is on the left against people who want to just preserve freedoms in the United States, freedoms for them as well. And it is quite often a scary situation that we find in this country, of the threats that we have from the left and from big government. The biggest lesson that we can learn from the Holocaust and from World War II is the dangers of big government. It wasn't private enterprise that committed genocide. It was big government. And so that's the danger that we're facing now. Is this specter of big government being a danger to these United States. And a danger to our freedoms, a danger to the First Amendment. And so with all this being said, in a sense, there's much more of a danger of a typology, at least, of Christian nationalism coming out of the left. I mean, it's the left-wing European countries that are Christian nationalist countries, and that's why those countries have a mediocre form of religion, because the churches have been widely reduced to museums. Why? Because they have socialized religion. And socialism leads to mediocrity. Whereas the free market, having competition, is what produces excellence. And that's why these United States, where we have a spiritual free market, religion excels in ways that it does not anywhere else in the world. And that's really the key to the excellence of these United States, is because we are essentially a religious country, particularly because the government stays out of the religion business and leaves the religions alone, as opposed to, I remember applying to be the chief rabbi of Munich, Germany, and I had an interview on the telephone, and they explained to me every clergy person in Germany is a government employee, and they collect taxes and they distribute them according to the populations of how many people belong to various religious communities. And so the population of Lutherans in Germany would lead to how much money goes to the Lutheran Church and to pay for the Lutheran clergy. And how many Jews there are goes to the Jews, to the synagogues and the rabbis. And how many Muslims there are goes to the mosques and to the imams. And I've heard people claim, well, I was talking to a South African Jew, and he said, well, this is why we don't have in South Africa the type of, reform and this and that, which I'm not sure that's totally true, but it preserves the orthodoxy because it's a government-run business and it's socialized religion. But I don't think we need that. Certainly not in America. And so in that sense, that is why we have excellence in America, and that is why the American right will never be Christian nationalist in the sense that they would want to abolish the free exercise clause or the establishment clause. But many are what we would call Christian nationalists in the sense that their nationalism is cured and tempered by their Christianity, and that's a good thing. And I, as a non-Christian, I, as a Jew, would much rather live in a country that's run by Christians than a country that's run by atheists. Because the countries that have been run by atheists murdered more people than the Nazis. And yet those of us who follow what we follow here, and we have the freedom of religion that we have in America, we live in a good way because of this aspect of freedom, and that we live in a republic where we are protected against the dangers of unfettered democracy and mob rule, but rather we have freedom that's protected because of the religious freedom that we have in this country, and because of the Bill of Rights that maintains the little r Republican spirit of this great land and protects us from the dangers of unfettered democracy and protects us from the dangers of the mediocrity and ultimate, dangers of socialized religion and socialism in general. So anybody, if you do know somebody who supports religious nationalism in the sense of getting rid of the freedom of religion and getting rid of the Establishment Clause, then what they are essentially promoting is socialized religion. So ask them that. Is that what you support? Do you support socialized religion? And I would think there would be more people on the left who would want to see a type of socialized religion so they could control the churches. And that's more of the danger that we have here. And so I think that the dangers of what the fears of Christian nationalism, we should be more afraid of coming from the left than coming from the right. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment. We'll see you later. All right. How do I turn this thing off? This one?